Hello everyone, welcome back to another kind of deck run through here for decks to be considered for the Lorcana Challenge in Atlanta. Next up we have kind of my take on Blue-Red. Steel or Sapphire Ruby is a deck we've all come to kind of know and hate and love, or whatever side of the coin you're on with that one. It's a very polarizing deck, and one deck that I've has definitely deterred me from playing Amber Steel Songs for certain, despite my success with it in previous events. It's a super strong deck that really has all of its cards line up in a way of just ignoring what your opponent's doing, killing everything, and eventually finishing the game off with Tamatoa and Lucky Dime. We all kind of know how that combination works. Tamatoa has been a card that has existed since set 1. We were kind of all just waiting for it to be very good. We knew it was going to get there, but when wasn't really most certain. But this is a super powerful deck. I mean, you are trying to ignore the earlier parts of the game with One Jump Ahead and Fishbone Quill, the two premier kind of acceleration effects that you have in this color pair. Along with our How Far Will Go, just to start dropping Medusas, Dragons, Be Prepared on the earliest turn 4. And most decks have a big problem coming back from that. I don't really need to go through too many of the cards. I mean, Queen of Hearts is there, kind of play a little bit of defense. You've seen more decks play more copies of them. Judy I'll get to in a minute, but Belle is a card that we've seen a lot of to combine with Lucky Dime late in the game. That's a bit cheaper than Tamatoa to have a 5 lore burst. One of the most threatening things against this deck is to just ensure you never let them get to 15 lore. Once they're at 15 lore, any Belle, which sometimes they play up to 3, I've never seen really 4, but up to 3 is a pretty one-shot way to make Lucky Dime happen out of nowhere, and it can be kind of demoralizing to play against. Honestly, that's the name of this deck, is really just demoralizing Sapphire Ruby. It's not fun to lose to, because a lot of their cards are so powerful. Even making a few mistakes against it doesn't really hurt in a lot of ways. Sometimes they can play almost playing things at random and still win, but it's something I've considered, and kind of one of the key things to look for when playing this deck is always treating your cards a little bit differently going first or second. Cards that go up in value going second are cards like Queen of Hearts. Cards you always want in your hand are like cards like One Jump Ahead and Fishbone Quill and Popsicle. Those 3 cards, I would say One Jump, Fishbone, and Popsicle are the 3 most important cards to have in your opening hand. And I don't know if I'd ever mulligan them, in all honesty. Even One Jump Ahead going second against Emerald, there's a chance I may still keep it just to force them to have to Ursula on turn 2. Kind of controlling parts of the tempo of the game. Even if they play an Ursula on turn 2, sure, it's not great for you, but it's not a 2 lore character when going second. So them not dealing with 2 lore character going second for you is pretty strong. It even keeps them off maybe gaining additional 3 ink or so. The 4 cost characters that kind of develop an advantage, Grammatala and Harm Flavorsham. We've kind of seen a bunch of... Grammatala does a great job just porting over when you don't have Flavorsham, or late in the game finding key pieces to the deck to kind of help close out, whether it be an answer in the form of Be Prepared or Scar, which are very similar in functionality. Scar kind of like an extra copy of Be Prepared. I've seen versions play more copies of Scar, but I've eschewed it in this version, and more cards that are interesting I'd say we'll get to in a second here. But Maui, a staple of most Ruby decks in the game right now in set 3 meta. Meta Medusa, of course, being the powerhouse that it is, kind of shutting off most opposing threats, even really early. But no explanation for those. They're all just powerful Ruby cards that we've seen in many decks. Tamatoa being the late game engine, as is Maleficent. Develop Your Brain. I only have 3 copies here to help make room for some of the cards I want to include. One Jump Ahead and How Far I'll Go being, of course, your acceleration pieces, and Let It Go, kind of a catch-all. A fine card, just when you need to have a removal spell. Be Prepared, of course. I still think you would want 4, even though there's some lists that want to play less and more Scars. I think Be Prepared is just the best one in an unknown field where you're not necessarily going to have, a super fixated metagame like you may see on Pixelborn be developed. It may just be what people want to play, and Be Prepared is pretty good against the random things that your opponent plays against. Shield of Virtue has been used in a lot of ways to challenge multiple times, help deal with locations, and just as an item for Flavorsham. Popsicle, Fishbone Quill, Lucky Dime, pretty basic cards. The big card for this deck, and one I've been toying with in a lot of cases, and I'd say that I've innovated to help make this deck kind of my own in some way when testing with it, is Sword of Truth. So for those who don't know, Sword of Truth is a 4-cost uninkable item that has the ability just to banish itself without paying any ink, to then banish a villain character. You're going to have to play against a lot of decks that are the same as yours. You can play against mirror matches quite a bit. I imagine this to be one of the most played decks, if not the second most played, with I think Ruby Amethyst being the most played still for multiple reasons. But Sword of Truth is a card that is not dead in pretty much any matchup because it also hits Ursula, Deceiver of All, the 3-cost Ursula. When going second, you can even one jump ahead into Sword of Truth, and then they can never use Ursula. One of the ways to kind of help stymie some of the early Emerald card advantage pulls is to kill the Ursula, and this can do that. And when going first, you don't need a one jump ahead to make it line up perfectly against the Ursula, but it's an added bonus there. But the big part of it that to me stands out, and the reason I like it for the mirror match, is because it answers Tamatoa. And it answers Tamatoa in a way that you can then bring back with your own Tamatoa to kind of allow you to keep theirs off the board indefinitely. Tamatoa in the mirror match is typically not wanting to be played until there's a Lucky Diamond play. Lucky Diamond is the most important card in the mirror match, but the ability for Sword of Truth to be rebought with Tamatoa, and you can also banish characters like Medusa, Tremaine, Scar, or Maleficent Dragon with Sword of Truth. Actually, it's a lot of cards in this deck. Kind of the cheaper ones it doesn't, but Sword of Truth lets you play a much more controlling game and have a significant advantage going long against them, to where they're then forced to leave a Lucky Diamond play and then develop Tamatoa to immediately gain lore with it, versus having a Tamatoa stick around and maybe you don't have, the Be Prepared or the Maleficent Dragon or the Tremaine. There's extra copies of Sword of Truth, which then all of your Tamatoas afterwards can rebuy and kind of put a force field up. You kind of have this sitting in play. There's not too much item hate in the mirror match. There's just a couple copies of Judy Hopps potentially. But Sword of Truth kind of lets you have a preset answer. And worst case scenario with the card, sure, it's uninkable. You have cards like Fishbone Quill that can ink it. In matchups where it's not as good. But again, most decks, aside from Amber Steel, have targets for it. And Amber Steel is a good enough matchup already. I think it's okay to play some cards like this. It still can kill the queen, the 5-cost queen that shifts for 2 in that matchup, so it's not completely dead. But that's that matchup where it's the worst. And that matchup is something I'm not too concerned with if I'm playing Blue-Red. That's one of the ones I'm looking forward to playing against a lot because of how good it is for you. It's one of the most polarizing matchups, I think, in Lorcana is Amber Steel versus Red Blue. Now, granted, versions of the deck with Sleepy's Flute are a little bit more difficult, but the inclusion of Judy Hopps is for decks kind of like that with Sleepy's Flute, which can be a little bit frustrating at times because you don't have many item removal. But going back to the plan of keeping Tamatoas off the board indefinitely with Sword of Truth, you want to make sure that they can't preemptively develop a dime and then just use Tamatoas essentially like burn spells, where you play them and then immediately use Lucky Dime and gain 5 to 6 lore. And then they kill the Tamatoa. All right, well, I still have this Lucky Diamond play, and I'm going to just play another Tamatoa, and that's what your opponent's game plan is. So to kind of prevent that, you want some number of item hate in the 70 or in the 60, not 75, in the 60 to answer Lucky Dimes, so that they would have to, in a lot of cases, play Tamatoa and have enough ink to play Dime and activate it. That's 17 ink. That's a lot of ink to really ask, and sometimes that's not how the games play out. More often than not, you're not going to get to 17 ink in this deck, even though you can. But Judy Hopps and Sword of Truth are kind of the two cards I really like and how well they play together in tandem. Sword of Truth preventing Tamatoa from sticking around ever more than one turn, and Judy Hopps preventing an immediately played Tamatoa from having as much of an impact with Lucky Dime, even though their played Tamatoa can rebuy the Lucky Dime. A lot of this deck is relying on the power of Lucky Dime. I will say it's one of the most important cards in the mirror match too. I've gone as far in some cases, if my ink worked out and I know I'm playing against the mirror match, to keep it in my opening hand because of how important it is. Even if you play it on turn 7 and you're not under too much distress from a board, an early board from your opponent playing cards like Flavor Sham and Tala and kind of sweeping that way, Lucky Dime can actually just help propel you to a game state to where you're inevitably going to win in a few turns as the game goes on. And I think that as long as your ink kind of works out, you have some acceleration, Lucky Dime is an okay keep in the mirror match, honestly. I know a lot of the time you kind of play out your hand, and even with one Tala or Flavor Sham or how far it'll go, you're likely to get to 7 without having to need to ink it, the card in hand to ink the Lucky Dime. And you have a lot of card draw just to kind of filter through everything as well. Important to note for this type of deck, and I think I've seen a lot of people make the mistake of doing when playing it, is specifically the card Develop Your Brain. It's one that I've had in some number in this deck, higher numbers and lower numbers back and forth. I think How Far Ago does a pretty good Develop Your Brain impression to where you get to kind of make the card selection late in the game, but also accelerate. Develop Your Brain is one of the cards where if you can map out your first few turns of the game and not need to play Develop Your Brain, just don't, or ink it. Say if your hand contains one jump ahead and a Quill and a Flavor Sham, the only thing you're really missing is a Popsicle, which you can't really, have too much control over whether you draw it on turn 1 or not. But you might play your Develop Your Brain. I would suggest holding off on it. The longer you wait with Develop Your Brain, the longer you know what you actually want with the card. So advice for playing this deck is to just ensure that you're making sure you have a game plan for how your turns are going to play out. You don't get in positions where you're too greedy with your mulligans to where you have a bunch of uninkables, because this deck is the greediest deck in the game as far as uninkables go. It has, I think, 21 uninkables in the deck, and that's breaking almost all my rules for how you build decks and play with it, but it's just a necessity of the power level of the deck to play the cards that you want. And you do have a lot of forgiving cards in Fishbone Quill, One Jump Ahead, and How Far I'll Go to accelerate and ignore that fact, more so treating One Jump Ahead as an inkable card and How Far I'll Go as an inkable card. Fishbone Quill kind of minding the gap there. But this is a deck that, I, again, expect to see a lot of. It's one we've seen for a long time. There's a lot of hours put into it. Trying to break, again, a mirror match potential is my one focus that I've been trying to do, because I don't like when playing a deck to feel like the mirror match comes down to a lot of random factors that are out of my control. And I think Sword of Truth is an addition that I don't think anyone's really experimented with in a significant way, but the fact that it hits Ursula against some of the Emerald decks that come down early, and also the fact that it helps you ice out Tamatoas in a mirror match is a really big swing. And I would suggest playing this exact list if I was playing Blue-Red. I'm still undecided. I'm posting this one, I think, on Thursday. So yeah, we'll know Friday. I'll post the main deck list of what I have decided on playing, because I'm only really bringing one deck for set 3 and one deck for set 4 to Atlanta to kind of pack light. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, everyone. I hope you guys like this kind of deck tech and suggestion for how this deck functions, what it preys on, and what it's weak to. The Emerald Amethyst deck is probably the worst matchup to play against. I think Emerald Steel is more favorable than Emerald Amethyst because of the card draw that Amethyst has. Kind of helps them propel forward even when you're able to sweep the board. But one of the key things I would say for play patterns with this is don't think, just ink. And when you can ink against Emerald decks, you probably should, just to make sure that all your top decks are live. Even if it's a key card in the matchup, you don't want to get it hit by a Sudden Chill or a Friar Tuck or anything to make a Prince John relevant. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, everyone. See you all with the next one, and good luck if you play this deck.